Hello, everybody. Welcome back to more Sins of the Father. It's not Sins of the Father, is it? It's Art of War. Well done. Starting as I mean to go on, getting the book name wrong. It is Art of War. Hell hath no fury. That way. Oh, we're doing well. We're doing well today. Happy VE Day, everybody. It's a little bit later than I thought that it was going to be, or I was planning on streaming because we wasn't quite sure at what time my close are having like a street party type thing, and we weren't sure what time it was going to be kicking off. But it's not going to be till a little bit later on. So I've got some more book reading for you, and I left it on a little bit of a cliffhanger yesterday. Don't worry, we're going to find out if Parker's okay. So it's chapter 10 today. I'm just going to dive straight in. Chapter 10. Dropping to her knees beside Parker, who was slumped alongside against the short. I'm doing well today. Dropping to her knees beside Parker, who was slumped against the short wall that ran underneath the wide lounge window. She tried to stem the tidal wave of thoughts that claimed he was dead, that he'd been killed, all because she'd asked him to come along with her on an Empire investigation that he didn't need to be a part of. She did this. She caused this tragedy. He wasn't dead, though. Bruised and battered and feeling very sorry for himself, but not dead. Martha couldn't understand how he'd gotten in such a state, let alone begin to explain how he'd acquired a 3-talon claw mark on the bicep of the arm that hung limply by his side. Her brain seemed to have short-fused somehow, and though the purest of relief flooded her body when he gazed up at her with pained blue eyes, she was lost in her own head, her own sense of panic and confusion. What the hell had happened down here? What the hell could have done this to him? She must have spoken out loud because Olivia, who seemed to be better emotionally equipped to be able to handle the fact that a man that she'd once been married to was in a bloodied heap on the floor, all but angrily spat. Wraiths. She had an army of goddamn wraiths as she went around the other side of the other uninjured side of his body from where Martha knelt. She summoned them. They attacked us. Parker made a noise that sounded like he wanted to say something but was in too much pain to verbally communicate it properly, prompting Martha to shake her head and urge him not to try, not to waste his strength on it. He responded by cursing repeatedly under his breath. Okay, big guy, Olivia assured him as she crouched down enough to get her arm around his body and encourage him to his feet. A maneuver that took far too much effort and seemed to be only causing him more pain, a fact that he verbally bellowed out loud in a way that no gentleman should ever speak to a lady that was only trying to help him. Fortunately, Olivia didn't seem to take any of it personally. Moving to support his other side, Martha helped get him up onto his feet, feeling like she was floundering, and not simply because her back, ankle, and midriff complained. It felt like every part of her protested at their own pain still being ignored. She didn't have a clue what to do, even though she'd been in situations like this before with the sons of Azazel getting injured. But it never affected her so deeply, so personally, not like this. God, she wasn't equipped to handle this, not with Parker. I've got him, Olivia assured her, likely able to see how difficult she was finding it. Secure the house while I get him into the car. We can't leave this place wide open for anyone to walk into. It's much too dangerous. Right. Of course they couldn't. Keys are in my coat pocket, she instructed. Martha nodded, retrieved them, stepped back out of the way. It was painful to watch as Olivia guided Parker out of the house through the small hallway that they'd been reluctantly standing in before. This time, Martha felt no pangs of irrational jealousy, only sadness, which she knew was born from the fact that the one person she'd never wanted to see fall victim to the dangerous life she led had gotten hurt, and there'd been absolutely nothing that she could have done to prevent it. She hated feeling so helpless, so ineffective. It wasn't who she'd become since she'd left Marytown. It wasn't who she wanted to ever become again. Steeling herself, Martha buried what she was feeling and completed the task that she'd been asked to complete. Physically securing the house by making sure the windows in the lounge were resealed and the front door had been locked shut. She didn't know how long Olivia's magic would hold the spectre that resided within it at bay, and right then she didn't care. Her people were out, safe if hurt, some worse than others. Rebecca bloody Patterson's reckoning could wait until later. Nearest medical facility was located in Blackthorn. The hospital there had a small, busy emergency department. Martha remembered the place from her merry visits as a child, but that was not where Olivia hurriedly drove them. Amongst this impressive list of subcontractors, Empire had a personal physician on the books, a man who seemingly patched them up when they got injured in the line of duty and also saw to their minor medical concerns. Dr. Leon Tully worked out of a private clinic that was located beyond the border of Marytown on the edges of Blackthorn. Rather like Peter Maxwell, he converted a former residential property into his place of business, and the staff at the clinic had become respected enough that it kept him far out of trouble's reach most of the time. As they drove the short distance, Olivia filled Martha in on the history between the man and her father's agency. It was a tragic tale involving the physician's 4-year-old daughter, a nasty spirit, his pregnant wife, who had seemingly taken a fatal tumble down the stairs at home. The team at Empire had not been able to repair the terrible loss that he had suffered. But unlike the authorities, they believed his little girl when she repeatedly insisted that Mummy had been killed by the bad thing that had haunted their home and had eliminated the threat before it had gotten the chance to claim another innocent life. Although they had experienced no such repayment, they had expected no such repayment. Tully had offered to his ongoing services to the people who had saved his daughter, and a sort of professional friendship had blossomed between them. Now he was the only doctor they ever saw. It was evident by the tone of Olivia's voice as she spoke about him that he was someone she respected and personally liked, which made Martha feel a little bit better about what was happening. Parker was hurt, but at least he was going to be looked after by someone who clearly cared about him, whether he believed he actually needed to have treatment or not. The clinic was somewhat busy when they arrived, a testament to the staff that Dr. Tully had recruited. While Martha understood they couldn't simply jump the queue, no matter how much pain Parker was in, it frustrated her so much that Olivia had been forced to go and have a polite conversation with the lady in reception, lest the Nephilim cause a scene twice. It had taken less than 5 minutes for Parker to be called through to see Dr. Tully after the second time. Sometimes impatience could be effective, if hardly virtuous. Martha made sure to smile and say thank you. Whilst he was off being treated, she hadn't wanted to start getting antsy again, so she tasked Olivia with the unenviable job of explaining to her how Rebecca Patterson, a woman who had been murdered, was still around, not exactly alive, but definitely kicking, and not only able to attack both Olivia and Parker with her small personal army of wraiths, but had enough juice left in her undead battery to subdue Martha as effectively as she had. Her research suggests that she was into some dangerous stuff before she died, Olivia disdainfully said, sitting beside Martha on a comfy waiting room chair. I've never been one to judge, and Lord knows I've dabbled with stuff I probably never should have touched before today. But some of the literature Rebecca had on her shelves was about crap I would never even dare research, let alone put to practical use. Stuff like what? Necromancy, the conjuration and subjugation of spirits, demonology. Martha all but sighed. Demons. Given the interest of her clientele, I guess that shouldn't be surprising. But I'm so damn disappointed in her, Olivia huffed, and myself for not seeing it sooner. The books are right there. I should have known. Shaking her head, Martha likewise rued. I thought she was a good person. From what I felt when I did the touch reading, I thought she had noble intent, that her misgivings over helping my stepfather were from her not wanting to dabble in something so awful, so dark. I thought she cared. She probably did, Olivia argued. Magic can totally corrupt the user if it is wielded improperly. Even if it didn't manifest itself when she was alive, given the horrible nature of her death, I can't imagine anyone would be sane. That kind of power and desire for vengeance must be toxic. Martha shifted uncomfortably in her seat in spite of herself, not able to think about what had happened between her and the spectre in the heat of the struggle without feeling guilt. She knew exactly what it felt like to want to make those who abused you pay. It was a dangerous tightrope to walk. Olivia didn't seem to notice her discomfort, lost in her own little bubble of rueful pondering, which she felt comfortable to verbalise, shaking her head and all but cursing. Wraiths. I can hardly believe it, but it makes a lot of sense when you put it together. She didn't have any warding on the house because she didn't think she'd need it. Might have even been worried about it putting off a potential client, a dangerous one. She thought her wraiths would keep her safe, protect her from danger if she was ever attacked there. Only they didn't. Olivia frowned. Apparently not. Maybe they weren't her wraiths to command, Martha suggested. No, they're hers, she disagreed adamantly. Wraiths are ancient spirits that become trapped within the mortal realm so long that they forget who they were before and become puppets to a stronger, more powerful entity, one that controls them. Without a master, they're aimless, empty vessels. The conjurer who commands them essentially fills them up with their own power and makes them corporeal. She visibly shuddered. The ones that attacked me had Rebecca Patterson's energy signature. I recognised it. Reckon she's had them for a long time, maybe her whole life. Given that Olivia had worked with the remnants of the woman's magic, Martha wasn't inclined to disagree with her deduction. It didn't make her feel better about the spectre she encountered and the power that it'd been able to wield, but it helped her to understand what had attacked her friends, ancient spirits controlled by a very powerful undead witch. Olivia blew a steady huff of air out between her lips. You know, as brutal as it was, we got lucky in there today. If Rebecca had wanted to do more than mark her territory, we'd be goners, every single one of us. Martha was pretty sure that they would as well, given how the spectre had tried to brutalise her once it had perceived her as a genuine threat. She was only surprised that it hadn't turned its puppets on her in anger, but then it hadn't needed to. It had known she was empathic, knew precisely how to destroy her in the most wicked of ways. She asked Olivia, "Are wraiths really that dangerous?" As a frontline force, they're pretty brutal, and not just because they're so highly aggressive. I don't know how true this is, but I once heard a rumour that they secrete a poison into their claws that can be absolutely deadly if it gets into your bloodstream. Parker seemed to be okay after he got hit, but I don't know if he got lucky. Maybe it targets people with certain supernatural markers, a way of assuring that they can be neutralised, people with magic like me or mystical powers like you. She frowned in irritation. Then again, I don't even know if it would hurt you, seems as though you're, have angel genes or whatever. Maybe you would be safe. Martha tried not to feel offended by the pagan's oafish ways of trying to describe her heritage and focused on what she'd been told about the wraiths. In all honesty, her Nephilim blood did protect her from many things that could decimate a human immune system. She'd never gotten sick from common bugs or infections from her wounds, and she healed quickly. It was definitely not something she wanted to test firsthand, though. The claw marks on Parker's bicep had looked brutally painful. They could be lethally toxic as well. It was hard to imagine how anybody survived an encounter with a wraith. Perturbed yet curious, Martha asked her companion, "How is it you know so much about them? I've never heard of wraiths." "Funny story, that one, actually," Olivia responded rather eagerly. "When I was living in New York, I dated a guy whose ancestors dated way back to when it was barely much more than a township. Big supernatural buff, really into monster lore and stuff like that. He told me the story about a reclusive sorcerer and his great-great-grand whatever used to know. Some tin pot who was always working on a new, wild, innovative incantation. One hell of a magic user, but a real crackpot, hated by the regular folks in town. Yeah, I can imagine," Martha found herself able to relate. "He had a daughter who was about the only person he ever spent any time with, communicated with. Friendly girl, but she was protective of him and getting to knock down fights in the nearby tavern, defending his honour from people who called him names, getting herself into trouble. One morning she was found, beaten, raped, then murdered outside of town. And guess who the bigoted locals went and pointed their finger at?" Reluctantly, Martha asked. "The crackpot magician father." "Exactly," Olivia nodded his head. "The local magistrate even claimed that he'd witnessed the vile deed occur, but it was all bullshit. Truth was, it was actually him that killed her. He tried it on whilst drunk, and she rejected his advances, made him look weak and ineffectual." "Not exactly shocked," Martha stated. "Yeah, that would do it." "Yeah," Olivia crumpled her face in disgust. "She embarrassed him in front of his peers. That sort of thing is never only about sexual rejection." Martha wished that she could disagree, because she knew far too well what that sort of thing was about, and she wasn't interested in having any sort of conversation about it. Not then, not there, likely not ever. Steering the conversation away from things that made her want to go back in time and commit an act of justifiable homicide, Martha asked, "So, did the crackpot sorcerer get falsely convicted for killing his daughter, or did the witnesses to what really happened defend him?" "Of course not," Olivia made a noise of disgust. "It was his word against that damn magistrate. And the witnesses acted like they didn't know any better, like they'd just been waiting for an excuse to get rid of him. The accusation fueled their hatred for him, and they went after him, dragged him through the streets and strung him up. A pariah turned into a scapegoat." Martha frowned. Not a happy ending. Nor did it explain how Olivia had been able to identify the things that had attacked her and Parker in the house of Rebecca Patterson. Feeling impatient and more than a little bit grumpy, wanting to fix problems that are impossible to now mend, she asked how the story was connected to what had happened, wanting to move on. "Well, as he was being dragged through the streets like a vile criminal, the sorcerer yelled out a curse, promised he'd come back and make each and every one of them pay for what they'd done to him and his beloved daughter. And he did. He came back as a phantom and carved a bloody path of vengeance through the town, ending with the magistrate that defiled his girl being strung up in the same spot that he died. Olivia paused, grimaced in revulsion. I don't even want to go into what he apparently did to that man, but it was bad and not really important to the story. In the sorcerer's experimentation, however, he found a way to conjure and control something that he could use to kill his enemies, a weapon of mass death from beyond the grave. Martha stated the obvious. He used wraiths like Rebecca Patterson. Olivia nodded her dishevelled blonde head, clearly in some shock as she repeated her earlier claim. Yeah, I hardly believe it. All this time, I honestly thought that my boyfriend was making the story up as a way to scare me, because as it turns out, he was a bit of a prick. But they're real. Well, they were real. She'd now seen them for herself. They'd gone after her, and Parker when he'd intervened in the vicious fight. Sitting next to Martha, the usually self-assured pagan visibly shook herself, like she was trying to rid herself of a memory of what happened in the dead woman's house. As she calmed, audibly exhaled, she confessed. When that one wraith grabbed me out of nowhere, it was so strong, it dragged me down the stairs. For a while, I couldn't do a damn thing. Are you all right? Martha asked her. Do you need to see someone? No, I'm fine. She batted the concern away with a quick, dismissive waft of her hand. The fall smarted, but once it had me in the lounge, it let me go, and I was able to cast up a magical barrier around myself to stop them from getting at me. But boy, did they try. Persistent, horrid little monsters. Martha felt her eyes go wide. How many wraiths were down there? 5. One in each corner in the room, plus the one that grabbed me. They kept throwing themselves at my barrier spells, trying to get through them, and caused even more mess than was already in there. But I wasn't in any real immediate danger. Rebecca was pissed that I was there in her house. She wanted me gone one way or another. She shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. Can't say I blame her. Witches can be even more bloody territorial than psychics, you know. She must have thought that I was a threat to her somehow. Martha didn't really know that, but it didn't surprise her. She had a couple of people in her otherworldly family who were magic users, and her a handful in their own rights. While Stefan had practitioners within his elite handpicked company, they were not usually amongst those that he kept close acquaintance with. She wasn't sure if it was the magic or simply a clash of personalities. It seemed like a coincidence, but stranger things did happen. I was so focused on her warding, the gifted woman beside her thought out loud. It was like I couldn't see past it when I should have been more observant about the other things in our house. I should have known there was more going on, but I couldn't see it. I wasn't prepared for what she was. I should have been more prepared for what happened. Olivia, none of this was your fault. It was a tough situation. That's kind of you, she smiled mutedly. Not sure my father will agree with that when I debrief him, but I do appreciate you saying it. Martha didn't know how to respond to that statement. She didn't know Peter Maxwell all that well, granted, and surely he'd be relieved that his team had made it out of a bad situation with only minor injuries. She couldn't imagine him blaming or berating Olivia for what had transpired. Going with her gut, she said, nobody could have predicted what was going to happen inside of that house. I have had some experience with spirits, but even I struggled to counter what little the spectre tried to throw at me. I was outmatched, and it knew it. Could have really, really hurt me if I hadn't known how to endure that kind of attack. It could have gone a lot worse than it did. Raising an eyebrow, Olivia appeared impressed. How did you? By doing what I had to do, something I'm not even sure that spirit deserved, however violent it was, Martha lamented. But it was a spirit. But it was the spirit or you two, and I don't care if that makes me wrong. I put you two first. Olivia gazed at Martha, her side on for such a long time that it began to make her feel uncomfortable. As she was about to buy the bullet and urge her to make whatever statement she was thinking, Olivia smiled. Thank you, Martha. Whatever you did, I'm sure it was necessary. Martha wasn't as convinced, but she shrugged, because it had given Olivia the respite that she needed to regroup and cast the magical spell that had driven the spectre away. Her conscience would have to be satisfied with that, even if in her heart she felt like she'd done something awful. From beside her, Olivia cagily said, Martha, can I ask you something? You can ask. I may not feel comfortable to answer. Fair enough. She seemed to hesitate for a moment before she decided to proceed, making the female Nephilim innately wary of what the question might be. The short conversation had already taken a few turns that felt a bit too close to perilous subjects for her comfort, but she was sure that Olivia wouldn't ever mean to intentionally upset or offend her. Some subjects were simply off limits to everybody. But the inquiry was somewhat tame. She was asked, "You keep saying it or the spirit when you talk about Rebecca Patterson." I just wondered if that was a deliberate decision because of something bad that might have happened to you, or if I was reading into something that wasn't there. I know some people don't like talking about paranormal stuff, and that's perfectly okay if you don't. Olivia held her hands up. I'm not judging. Unable not to smile ever so slightly, Martha quickly assured her, "I don't have any sort of hidden prejudice against spirits or the dead, Olivia." Well, I didn't think so, but it happens. Bad experiences can make people who deal with the kind of things that we deal with at Empire feel like every spirit they encounter must be negative. Every supernatural critter is a monster just because they're other. They're not always. As I said, I picked up on the way you talked about Rebecca Patterson, and I got curious. I don't know, Martha felt herself shrugging. Haven't dealt with a lot of spirits. I was a child when I saw my first ghost, and my stepfather got angry and called me a liar for speaking up about it. So I kept those things to myself after that. But I suppose that when it comes to the paranormal, I don't really see the people that they might have been before. The spirit is different. Like Rebecca. I saw a glimpse of who she was when I did the touch reading, and that person was fleetingly there today when I challenged her, but the spirit didn't seem to be a thing that could be reasoned with. Olivia countered. Did you try to reason with her? Towards the end. Do you think you might have ever been able to get through to her? Martha honestly couldn't answer that question because she looked back over what happened. Maybe the spirit of Rebecca was not the only one in that house that had acted on instinct, reacted to what they perceived to be an attack. Maybe it hadn't been as one-sided as it felt. She couldn't say for absolute certain, but it was clear they were going to have to find a solution to the issue before somebody else got hurt. Whether she can be reasoned with or not, we're going to have to go back there into that house. We can't leave ancient wraiths roaming free. I've been thinking about that, Olivia pursed her lips pensively. If you had that woman's power and an army of wraiths at your disposal, what would you be doing with them right now? Would you be waiting in your old house for somebody to come by so you could attack them? Or would you be like that guy in the story, hunting down those that wronged you and taking it to the bitch that stuck the knife into you repeatedly? Trying not to flinch at the pagan's poor choice of phrasing because it felt personal, Martha followed the implication of the question. She didn't like where it could end if a spirit like Rebecca Patterson had such a desire for revenge. Marytown had been punished enough for the sins of those who had abused what it might have once stood for. Didn't need an angry wraith army rampaging the streets seeking out people to decimate. Seemed like she was looking out the window, wishing that she could be outside. Do you think that she might be trapped? Something might have gone wrong with her incantations upon her death, or maybe before. It seemed to me like the wraiths were tethered to the house somehow. They didn't try to leave. Olivia shook her head. I know we're going to have to go back there. I don't want to, but we can't let it fall into the hands of the estate agent or anybody else. It's too much of a risk. Given how she reacted to me being there, she'd kill any magic user that walked into the place simply because she felt threatened. She nodded now, as if sure. I'll ask my father to make a call for her family, make them an offer for the place. Martha found herself awestruck. Your father would buy it outright? To potentially protect innocent people's lives? Absolutely. Martha smiled, impressed by such a gesture. While she was aware that Peter Maxwell was utterly genuine in his desire to see Marytown out of the clutches of the demon who'd once abused him, and that he had the means to dedicate his life to his cause, it blew her away to be reminded that the Nephilim were not in this fight alone. There were good people in Marytown, people who cared. To Olivia, Martha said, if you can figure out how to combat the power of the wraiths, I can probably fight them one-on-one and take them out. Shifting in her seat, she then grimaced ever so slightly. It felt like her whole body is starting to stiffen up while they'd been sat there waiting for Parker to be treated for his injuries. Expected when she considered how her whole day had gone. Her ankle still throbbed in a way that irked her, and her back felt like it was definitely bruised. Her midriff felt better, but it still ached. She needed a hot bath and a good night's sleep to heal. Are you all right? Olivia deflected Martha's earlier concern back on her. I could ask one of the nurses to give you a once-over if you're hurt, or you can wait for Tully. He's good at what he does, nice, warm hands. Deliberately rolling her eyes at the telltale smirk that played across the other woman's lips, Martha asserted, no, it's nothing that I can't soak off with a hot bath and some sleep. I heal fast. Nephilim perk. What happened to your hand? Martha gazed down at the appendage that was currently resting in her lap, still tightly bound in Stefan's handkerchief. Flexing her fingers, she felt some discomfort, It was hard to know whether it was from the injury or the tautness of the wrapping. She'd have to remove it and find out for sure, which she didn't attempt to do. Not yet. Maybe later. Maybe. Smiling, unable to help it, she declared, "A lesson in humility." Okay, Olivia shrugged, bemused. "Well, if you're sure you're doing fine, I won't push you. I've learned that lesson from Parker." "Oh, I'm sure you have." Gazing down at her hand and what was wrapped around it, Martha hated that her mind immediately picked up on Olivia's playful quip and led it on a not-so-many chase down some dark alleys in her mind. Swallowing hard, she acquiesced to her own rather masochistic sense of emotional and mental punishment and asked, "Olivia, what happened in there? I mean, with him? You told me that you were safe from the wraiths because of your magic, that you managed to get a barrier up so that they couldn't get to you. So why did they hurt him so badly?" "Because he's an idiot." Covering her mouth with her hand to stifle an involuntary titter of laughter, a release of tension that had been simmering up inside of her, Martha responded, "Well, yeah, he's always been that, but please tell me." Allowing what looked like carefully restrained frustration to show on her face, Olivia reiterated, "Oh, I'm deadly serious. He's always been, let's say, enthusiastic about protecting people that he cares for, right?" Martha nodded, as it was a fact that she knew too well. And like it was shared knowledge, Olivia added, "Don't get me wrong, I really love that about him. It's amazing. He's protective. Given all that he's been through, it's understandable. But today he acted like an absolute idiot." Martha frowned deeply. "What did he do?" "He came back to the house after he must have gotten your text, and I was back in the lounge by that point, surrounded by wraiths. But I was safe. I had my barriers up, and I told him that I was safe, that he should have stayed outside where I wanted him to stay. But, well, he tried to get to me, didn't he? To save me. He never does that. He knows better." Olivia muttered something that sounded like the word idiot again under her breath. Martha totally understood her frustration, empathised with her anger. "They beat the shit out of him," she continued, voice breaking a little as she recalled what happened next. "And he just wouldn't stay down, stop trying to get to me, not until one of them sliced him over and knocked him flat on his stubborn arse. Then he finally got the message." She shook her head back and forth. "It was so bloody stupid. They weren't trying to hurt him, only contain him, and he just had to keep pushing them, didn't he? He had to try and be a bloody hero. Should have just stayed outside." Sitting there trying not to react as viscerally as she wanted to over what she was being told and what she was feeling from Olivia's words, however indignant they might have appeared, Martha folded her arms across her chest, bit her lips and shook her head back and forth repeatedly. Seemingly needing to validate her assertions about the intentions of the creatures that injured Parker, Olivia continued to explain. "So I was dragged down to the lounge. The wraith had me by the hair, and yeah, it hurt, but not once did they try to claw me, not once. And they charged the barrier, clubbed at it, tried to batter it down, as little more of a warning of what they could do if it carried it on. Tried to batter it down, but didn't use their claws. They used them as a last resort against Parker, as little more than a warning of what they could do to him if they carried on. It wasn't supposed to be as brutal as it was. It shouldn't have been that bad. But he just wouldn't bloody stop." Sounding as affected as she felt, Martha said, "I believe you. God, Martha, it was so pointless. Didn't need to go that way." "It's over now," she asserted. "He's safe. He's getting help." Olivia sounded genuinely relieved. "Yeah, bloody idiot." "Right." The emotionally stressed pagan agreed wholeheartedly, smiling. Martha uncrossed and crossed her legs in front of her. Excuse me. The opposite way around, and even though her ankle still ached, she envisioned it being put to good use as she gave her oldest and dearest friend another good kicking. Considering the caliber of her enemies, it was inevitable that somebody who Martha cared about might get hurt in the line of fire. It stung more than she had the capacity to understand that it had been Parker, the one person who'd gone out of his way to make her return to Marytown feel worthwhile, when he had every reason to shun her forever. He should never have gotten his arm slashed open and beaten to a pulp by an ancient wraith. Should never have been in that situation. That it happened due as much to his recklessness as to the power of their attackers, made her want to be so mad at him she could beat his backside up Blackthorn Hill and back down it again. But when he finally emerged from the treatment room out back in the company of a tall, relatively handsome, dark blonde-haired man that Martha assumed was Dr. Leon Tully, his arm bandaged up and supported by a white fabric sling, Her anger merged with blessed relief. She was happy to see that he was okay, happy and relieved. Likewise, it seemed, was the woman sitting next to her, who audibly sighed, muttered something under her breath that might have been a prayer of thanks to a higher power, but Martha wasn't in a position to make such an assumption on Olivia's behalf. She didn't know her that well. Trying to put on a brave face, Martha said, "Well, he looks fine." Olivia nodded, but she didn't say anything in response. Her gaze firmly locked on the two men, like she wasn't quite ready to speak. Dr. Tully seemed to be offering Parker some additional medical advice, his hands gesticulating in that unique way that confidently knowledgeable people have, before sending him on his not-so-many way back to the women who'd brought him in. As he watched him go, assessing the way that the patient moved, Martha could see that he genuinely seemed to care about the disgruntled, yet woefully humbled paranormal investigator that he'd just patched up, and she decided that she approved of him being Empire's personal physician. He was a good man. She was glad that he'd been there for her oldest friend. An opinion that was solidified when the doctor's gaze shifted in Olivia's direction, and he visibly hesitated when he saw the state that she'd gotten herself into. And he mouthed something to her that looked like if he was asking her if she was all right. She suddenly nodded back. But Martha could sense that she was struggling to emotionally hold it together, just wanting it to all be over. Almost as if the sight of the good doctor on top of the hard reality of seeing Parker injured was a little bit too much for her to mask for one day. Leon Tully tilted his head in the direction of the treatment area, and Olivia shook her head in response, reaffirming that she was all right. Then he winked at her, smiled in a way that could have only been described as with professional resignation, and then with a two-fingered salute went back to work, back to his patients, not making a scene to show how much he cared. The rather sweet exchange was either missed or ignored by Parker, who pouted when he reached the women, as if he was expecting to get either his knuckles rapped or find himself being pulled into a three-person embrace, and he wasn't sure which greeting that he'd be getting, or which he deserved. Gazing at her feet for a moment to compose herself, Olivia seemed to slip back effortlessly into her oh-so-casual demeanour. "Damage report. Are we going to have to amputate? Are you going to make it?" Parker shrugged gingerly, huffed loudly, glumly announced, "Got a lot of bruises and an armful of stitches. He doesn't think it's terminal." "Pity. I had an amazing black hat picked out ready for the service." "Better toss that back in the wardrobe. Not today, I'm afraid." With much light-hearted ruefulness, Olivia exclaimed, "Gosh darn it." Parker managed to make the barrister smiles, but then his blue eyes finally rested on Martha and he looked utterly crestfallen, like he knew he was in big trouble and all he wanted to do was to go home, maybe try and forget about what happened, or at least pass out from the pain. Martha didn't know what she should do with any part of her body, let alone what she should say. She didn't feel strong enough to be able to control her emotions in the way that Olivia had. And given the way that the day had thus far gone, she didn't exactly trust her reactions to what she was feeling. If the sight of both Parker and Tully had been what it had taken for her pagan cohort to become almost undone, she herself wasn't half the woman that Olivia Maxwell was. All it took was one of them, this man, the eternal weakness in her personal armour. Martha couldn't simply shake it off, crack a few jokes, keep calm and carry on. She wanted him to be nowhere near things like ancient wraiths and spectral witches. She wanted him to not have his arm in a sling and not be in so much pain that it overshadowed her own aches. She wanted him to be able to live a full, long and happy life, rather than recklessly throwing it away, chasing down things that could kill him faster than he could blink. She wanted him to be safe, not hurt, not killed, safe. "Hey," he said, reaching out and taking her bandaged hand in the warm enclosure of his, without feeling the need to comment on the wrapping that was still around it, which was a good thing, because all Martha was able to think about in that moment was how she'd never once seen Stefan get himself into such a state in a whole decade of knowing him. He'd never done this to her, not even once. So what if he was faster, stronger, smarter than the human man who stood in front of her because he was Nephilim? He wasn't going to get himself killed because he was too stubborn or too emotional not to rush in. And nothing ever good could come of making such comparisons. Nor from the sad fact that it was Parker who was having to reach out and comfort her, because she was utterly incapable of functioning like a regular, caring person who was happy that her closest friend was safe. Sometimes she absolutely hated being who she'd grown up to be. Before Parker could do anything as galling as asking her if she was all right, Martha sternly shook her head at him. "You need to go home." Sensing the tension and an opportunity to extricate herself from the terse situation, Olivia tactfully spoke up. "I'll bring the car around." Though he didn't take his eyes off Martha, Parker said, "Thanks, Liv." "Oh, don't get me wrong," she smirked. "I think you're an absolute idiot, and I'm hoping she's about to finish the job you never should have started." That made him bow his head, finally rebuked. "Yeah, I bet." Though she was clearly unhappy, she gave him a conciliatory, if somewhat resigned, pat on his good arm before adding very softly, "Glad you're still in one piece, big guy." And then she left, disappearing through the entrance of the clinic at a brisk pace, as if she couldn't wait to get out of there. Martha's eyes followed Olivia until the door sealed shut behind her, the rush of emotions she experienced not unlike those she'd been trying to battle outside of Rebecca Patterson's home. Silly, petty emotions. Only now they came accompanied with a sinking feeling of bittersweet acceptance. Even though she would almost certainly brush it off with sarcasm and Parker would pretend that he didn't notice, Olivia still cared so deeply about the man she'd once divorced. The bond that remained between them was still so real, and yet she was unselfish enough to walk away when she felt like she needed to walk away. She knew herself well enough to know when to step back. And she steadfastly refused to be the thing that had come, but hang on, sorry, I lost myself a little bit there. And she'd steadfastly refused to be the thing that could come between Parker and the other girl that he'd once loved and lost. She was burying her own pain, being noble in the face of something she'd likely never thought would ever come to pass. It felt wrong to Martha, both wrong and unfair. She shook her head, not sure what she was going to do next. All she was feeling beginning to overwhelm her, a crisis of control she couldn't temper, so it was inevitable that Parker again took the lead in trying to smooth out the tension from the whole messy situation, because she didn't know how to do such a thing. He brought the hand that he was holding up to the side of his face as if a small act of physical contact would help her feel and know that he was all right. Hurting like hell, but he was going to be fine. And it was such an old familiar gesture that it made her heart fit to burst. His voice was timid, unsure as he asked, "Are you mad at me?" "Yeah," she said, not trusting herself to offer more. "Would it help if I said I'm sorry?" "No." He started to try and explain. "Martha, you got yourself hurt," she interrupted him, "badly. I know, but I also got patched up and it's going to be okay. You didn't listen when Olivia told you she was safe, that she had her barriers up and that you needed to stay outside. Trying to reach her was impulsive and it was stupid. What the hell were you thinking rushing into danger like that?" Sounding utterly sheepish, she admitted, "I don't know," before squeezing her hand. "Martha, I know you're upset, but will you at least look at me?" She gave in and met his gaze. Wished she hadn't, because it didn't help. Sounding and looking totally sincere, Parker said, "I'm sorry, okay?" "I don't know what I want more," she told him, eyes locking squarely onto his so that he grasped how serious she was. "To beat the crap out of you or hug you, and that's not a mindset that I ever want to have." He attempted to offer her a smile. "Well, I have a number of bruised ribs and a sore arm, so whatever you decide, can I request that you do it gently?" Martha tightly clenched up her jaw. "That's not helping." "I can see that. The next time we're in the field and something big and nasty gets between you and Olivia or any person that you care about, you need to listen to their instruction. Stay right where they are or retreat, whatever you need to do to get the hell out of its way and keep yourself safe." Inherently stubbornly, he shook his head, argued, "I can't do that." Angered, she retorted, "Oh, you will do that." "Martha, that's not who I am. You of all people should understand." "I do understand," she countered. "I watched you get the holy hell kicked out of you more times than I can count when we were kids. I know exactly the type of person that you are. But we're not kids anymore, and you can't be this hard-headed and reckless. Not when you're out here with me. I can't be worrying about you when I'm fighting. I can't be frightened that you're going to get hurt like this again. Do you understand?" With a smile far too knowing and far too smug, he replied, "Yeah." She let her hand relax on his cheek, let him reassuringly squeeze it again, felt the fight drain out of her. She'd said her piece. There was nothing left to yell at him about. Though she hoped he took some of the downtime that he was facing to reflect on why he'd done what he had. Martha knew precisely why. It involved a certain woman, one that he loved and wanted to protect, because he'd seen that she was in danger and he simply reacted, following his emotions rather than letting his better judgment assess what was really going on. A lot like he'd done for Martha when they were young, and he'd left at her defense whenever he felt like she was being besmirched or bullied. Whether she'd wanted him to or not, it seemed like some things had never really changed, while some things had, and they transformed everything. Sighing, feeling exhausted, Martha said, "Let's just get you home safe." God, please, he begged. I need to get clean and pass the hell out. There was a desire that Martha absolutely could empathise with. And as she permitted him to continue holding her hand as they walked to the entrance, she was glad that the day would soon be over. She wanted it to be over. It had been a hell of a day, the worst she'd experienced in a while. From beside her, Parker tactfully made a comment. How much trouble will it get me into if I point out that you're limping? I'm not limping, she lied. He laughed. You think I can't tell when you're hurt? I think you need to concentrate on how you got your own damn bruises and stop worrying about mine. Mine will heal overnight. You've got weeks of recovery ahead of you. It's not the same thing. Not by a long shot. Thoroughly told off, he concluded. Fair enough. When they left the building, they found Olivia standing on the edge of the road of the clinic waiting for them. Though it took Martha far longer than it should have to notice that she hadn't gone to collect her car from the nearby parking lot. She certainly hadn't ventured as far as she should have done, considering how long Martha and Parker had been inside. Her back was towards them. There was a stiffness in her shoulders and a tension along her spine that Martha recognised a fraction of a second before Parker did, hobbling along next to her. No sooner had she perceived it, the emotion that caused her friend to halt had hit her like a truck. Fear. Extreme, crippling fear. Unaware of it, Parker called out a name, or at least he called out the shortened version of her name that he seemed to like to use. But she didn't move, let alone respond. She simply stared off at something in the distance, as if she wasn't even aware that they were also outside. Reaching her, Martha followed her line of sight, and that was when she saw him. Standing on the other side of a narrow street was a man, a massive man, even by the otherworldly standards that Martha's own experiences granted her. Epically muscled and perfectly statuesque, he made Stefan and his band of impressive brothers look like they were playing at being warriors, though his clothing implied that he fought in the same modern utilitarian world that they did. A dark grey t-shirt fitted snugly over a pair of broad shoulders and an impressively sculpted chest. He wore no coat nor a jacket, as if he couldn't even feel the autumnal cold. Long sleeves wrapped around around biceps that were probably as thick as her thighs, muscled all the way down to a pair of dangerously clenched, powerful-looking fists. His almost black tactical trousers swathed a pair of thighs that seemed to go on forever, and his booted feet looked big enough to stomp a person's head and cover it completely, as he rendered it into nothing more than bloody mulch. He carried no obvious weapons that Martha could see, but she was certain that he wasn't going to need any. Deadly potential coiled itself up in every part of his body, ready to strike and do extreme damage with nothing more than his hands, explicitly dangerous. And that wasn't even the most frightening part of him. He had a face that was brutal yet striking, with cheekbones sharp enough to cut the heart right out of a foolish female's chest while she stood there, enthralled by all that he had going on for him, enthralled by all that he had going on for him as she was rooted by fear. His head was clean-shaven, so trimmed to his scalp that only a fine covering betrayed how it matched his dark, prominent brow. He had a jaw that could have been carved from granite, set in an unyielding line. His nose was prominent, mouth plump. His lower lip protruded slightly from the upper one, giving the impression that he was pouting, but that might have been from being the expression on his face. Martha had been stared down by many a physically impressive male who thought themselves tougher than her before, but the intensity of the gaze that she received when her interference was noted made her feel like she wanted to shrink inside of herself, make herself a smaller target so that she might be spared from whatever hell he was about to unleash on her as punishment. Never before had she been faced down with such animosity. Never before had she encountered such instant visceral hatred. Hooded eyes bored at her, eyes that were so dark she was unable to make out what colour they might actually be. Eyes that caused her to berate herself more than she already had for one day, because they hadn't just lost that elusive spark that gives a person their humanity in the way that the spectre of Rebecca Patterson's eyes had lost theirs. They simply had never had it to begin with. As the cold wind rolled down the street, subtler and more pervasive than any near winter breeze, Martha's skin prickled in the same recognition she experienced whenever she ventured out into the Blackthorn Hills, and she knew this man wasn't a man. I've lost myself. I'm so sorry. Oh dear, where am I? She knew this man wasn't a man. He was a monster, and one of the worst. What a horrible place to lose myself. I'm so sorry. She should have ushered her friends back inside of the clinic, where it might have been safer for them. Only she quite imagined that the beast staring down at her wouldn't think twice about following them inside, using the bones of Leon Tully and his staff to pick the flesh from his teeth when he was done eviscerating them all. She couldn't risk innocent lives, not like that. Sternly demanding that Parker keep a tight hold of Olivia and not dare try to intervene whatever happened next. Martha did the only thing that she could possibly do, the thing that she'd been trained to do, even if she was certain that the odds were far too great to overcome. She did her duty. Sending out a mental distress call, she stepped out into the road, a hand going to the small of her back, finally doing the thing that she'd been tempted to do all day. She drew her dagger, encircling it with her hand, feeling its weight, remembering its deadly potential. She had no idea what she was going to do when she reached her target, but she didn't think about it. At this point, it was all instinct. She marched towards her enemy as if she were prepared to fight, regardless of whether or not she'd be victorious or if she might survive. This was exactly why she'd returned to Marytown, meet her enemies head on and take down as many of them as she could. The monster that she was frankly expecting would end her quest right there and then before it had ever really had the chance to begin, watched her as she approached, and he didn't flinch, didn't prepare himself for battle, didn't abase himself for her lowly sake. He simply stared hard into her eyes, not remotely afraid of her or of the threat that he believed she posed. It was somewhat galling, but Martha was used to it. She'd never been the biggest nor the worst. That didn't mean she was inferior, and it was an underestimation she'd used to her advantage on more than one occasion. She would do so again if the need arose. Martha got closer to the ambusher. He still didn't react. Even closer. Nothing. As she took the next few steps, a smirk twisted up the corner of his lips. A nasty, unimpressed smile that yelled louder than any words could speak of what he thought of her. No, she wasn't worth his amusement. Then she reached the lip of the pavement, stepped up onto the curb. She didn't strike, for there was no point. The demon had vanished into the ether, leaving behind nothing but an angry foul wind on the air. That was the longest chapter yet. Yeah, that was chapter 10. A lot going on there, particularly at the end. I'm sorry for losing my place there. I glanced up like briefly, and then when I looked back down, I lost where I was completely in that moment. I don't think I'm going to say too much about how that chapter ended. I think I'm going to leave it as it is with that one. All I'm going to say is that Parker's okay. He's fine. He's beaten up, but he's fine. Martha's not handling it particularly well. Olivia was managing to keep it together, but yeah, as things happen, things sometimes drastically change on a moment, and there's not really anything else that I'm going to say about that other than come back for the next part, because I'm sure you're going to want to know what happens next. I certainly do. I know what happens next, obviously, but I want to read it. Yes. So I hope you enjoyed that. That was a long chapter. Thank you, as always, for watching. I shall be back tomorrow, hopefully at about 2:00, and we'll see where the story goes from there. Happy VE Day, everybody. Whatever you're doing, I hope that you celebrate it in whatever way that you choose to celebrate it. I hope that you keep safe. Spend some time with your loved ones if you can. And yeah, just relax and have a good day, because it's a really nice day today. It's nice and sunny here. So take care of yourselves, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.